I call the member for Port Stephens.
Thank you, Speaker. It's now been over 2 years since the residents of Williamtown, Saltash and Fullerton Cove were told that surface water and groundwater on and beneath their properties is contaminated by chemicals which were used on the RAF base Williamtown for roughly 30 years in firefighting foams. The residents were the last to know about the contamination, with the federal, state and local governments all being aware well before it was revealed to residents. Hunter Water embargoed 2 of its bores because of the contamination more than a year before residents were told. The EPA first received notification from Defence that contamination was leaving the base in 2010, but the public was not informed until late 2015, and so residents continued to draw water from their own bores, completely unaware that it posed a risk to their health. So from the outset there's been a sense of deep betrayal by state and federal agencies. 2 years on, and the betrayal continues. 2 years since residents were told, the state and federal governments still cannot sort out who is responsible for what. 2 years on, and the sickening buck passing continues at the expense of residents who are anxious and desperate for solutions. 2 years on, and the agency doggedly holds onto an arbitrary red line which supposedly clarifies the area affected by contamination, and yet we know that residents who live outside the red zone have test results that show up to 10 times the national average of PFAS in their blood. In budget estimates recently, Barry Buffier, the Chair and CEO of the New South Wales EPA, answered questions in relation to the Williamtown contamination. The Honourable Penny Sharp, my good colleague and Shadow Minister for the Environment, asked Mr Buffier what the EPA is doing to test outside the red zone in light of the elevated blood test results. Mr Buffier responded unhelpfully, and I quote, "What I would point out to you is that the polluter in Williamtown is Defence." So then the residents turned to the federal Senator, James McGrath, who has been charged with the responsibility of heading up a new federal PFAS task force. They raised the same issue with him about residents living outside the red zone who have elevated levels of the toxins in their blood. And what was the Senator's response this week? He replied, and I quote, "The matter you have raised falls under the responsibility of the New South Wales EPA." So that is how residents who are living outside the red zone with significantly elevated levels of PFAS in their system are being treated by the state and federal governments. The buck passing is nothing short of disgusting. And I have to say the engagement and response to this issue by the Minister for the Environment, the Honourable Gabrielle Upton, has been nothing short of appalling. To date, she has chosen not to visit the affected site nor meet with any of the affected residents, and neither did her predecessor. So this is where we are at. 2 years since my community was told of contamination leaving the RAF base, and at least 5 years since both levels of government were aware, and the buck passing still goes on, and the story gets much worse. Residents living on the other side of the red line have been given advice that everything was okay, that they could eat their eggs and their veggies, and that they had nothing to worry about. This advice was given by the New South Wales EPA to residents outside of the red zone. Those residents have since learnt that they have elevated levels of contamination in their blood. With at least 50 people now known to have had or currently have a form of cancer within a relatively unpopulated 5-kilometre stretch of road over the past 15 years, it's getting increasingly difficult to believe that there isn't a correlation between the contamination leaving the base and those cancers. And as if the state and federal response to date wasn't sickening enough, we know, and Barry Buffier confirmed budget estimates, that the contamination continues to flow from the RAF base onto surrounding properties. Let me make it clear, this is not a blind demand to expand the red zone. We want solutions for everyone affected and not blind ignorance in an effort to minimise liability. What I'm demanding on behalf of the desperate residents who are impacted by the contamination is that the EPA simply does its job, which is protect the environment and protect people. We understand that Defence has responsibility for its own land, but as soon as you get off Defence land, where my community lives, responding to and managing population incidents lies squarely within the remit of the EPA. That is undeniable. And frankly, my community is sick of the buck passing and ducking responsibility in an effort to minimise liability. So now we wear red ribbons in support of people living in and around the red zone. People across my community are putting their red ribbons on because goodness knows this government and the federal government are providing no support whatsoever.
Order.